November 11th, 2019, Buckingham Palace. Princess Beatrice, 31 years old, walked into a meeting she hadn't been invited to. 3 days before her father, Prince Andrew, was scheduled to record what was supposed to be a reputation-salvaging interview with BBC journalist Emily Maitlis, Beatrice arrived unannounced at the pre-interview negotiations. She brought a notebook. She sat down across from BBC producer Sam McAlister and began asking pointed, specific questions about format, framing, and intent. McAlister would later describe the dynamic in one word: rainmaker. As in, if Beatrice wasn't satisfied with the answers she got, the interview wasn't happening. She was the gatekeeper, the single person with the credibility and access to shut the whole thing down before it started. She didn't shut it down. She was reportedly convinced by McAlister and her father's private secretary, Amanda Thirsk, that there was no better option. Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew's close friend for over 2 decades, had died in federal custody in August 2019 while awaiting federal sex trafficking charges. Multiple women had given detailed, consistent accounts of what Andrew had allegedly done. Photographs existed. The palace position was becoming untenable. Someone decided a sit-down interview would help. Andrew recorded it on November 14th. It broadcast on November 16th. All 58 minutes of it. Within 4 days, Andrew had suspended all his public royal duties. The New York Times ran the headline that afternoon: "After disastrous Epstein interview, Prince Andrew steps down from public duties." He had, apparently, come out of that studio satisfied. Beatrice reportedly cried every day for weeks afterward. That gap, between a father who thought he'd handled it and a daughter who knew exactly what she was watching, is the entire geography of this story. Andrew created this disaster across years of choices that had nothing to do with his daughters. But Beatrice and Eugenie are the ones who have had to live inside it, navigate around it, build careers in its shadow, and eventually raise children in the specific atmosphere of a family name that became inseparable from one of the worst scandals in modern royal history. This story is about them, not him. Princess Beatrice was born August 8, 1988. Princess Eugenie arrived March 23, 1990. Their parents, Andrew, then 4th in line to the throne, and Sarah Ferguson, separated in 1992 and divorced in 1996, handing the tabloids 3 decades of material that began long before either girl could read and continued well after either could reasonably be expected to manage it. Their position in the royal hierarchy is what gets diplomatically called complicated. As granddaughters of the sovereign and daughters of the Duke of York, both carried HRH, Her Royal Highness, designations from birth. What they didn't carry was the working royal infrastructure. No official duties, no taxpayer salary for royal work, no formal institutional brief. Royal enough for the designation, not royal enough for the machinery that goes with it, which meant from early in their adult lives, they were building something professional without a net. Beatrice moved into technology and finance, sectors where a royal title can open specific doors, particularly in international markets, and where a scandalous surname can close them just as efficiently. Royal biographer Andrew Lowney noted that the sisters leverage their HRH designations to generate professional credibility, specifically citing Beatrice's work in Middle Eastern business contexts. The title functions in the right room. It also appears in every headline about their father. Eugenie went a different direction. She built a career in the London art world and co-founded the Anti-Slavery Collective, a charity working in the specific space of human trafficking and modern slavery. an anti-trafficking charity founded by the daughter of the man whose name would become synonymous with Jeffrey Epstein's. The irony isn't poetic. It's just a fact, which makes it worse. Neither woman was passive. Neither was waiting for a platform to land in her lap. Both were building something real, with real professional reputations, in the specific conditions available to them. What they couldn't control was what their father was simultaneously constructing in parallel. A set of associations and decisions that were eventually going to make the York name something no career could fully outrun. To understand what happened to Beatrice and Eugenie, you need to understand May 2011, which is 8 years before any of this reached public catastrophe. King Charles, as Prince of Wales, had long championed what analysts call the slimmed-down monarchy. Not a sprawling ceremonial apparatus of working royals attending ribbon cuttings across the country, but a streamlined working core centered on the monarch and the direct line of succession. Modern, efficient, less expensive to the public. The logic had internal consistency. It also had a structural consequence nobody much discussed at the time. People outside the direct line, specifically the children and grandchildren of second sons, people like Beatrice and Eugenie, were outside the core. Not excluded from the family, not stripped of their titles, but functionally on their own. In May 2011, the Daily Mail reported on the practical application of that logic. Both Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie had their 24-hour taxpayer-funded police protection removed. The cost had been £500,000 per year, a specific, public figure that made the case easy to defend. The formal reasoning was correspondingly tidy. The protection criteria applied to working royals, and the princesses weren't working royals. No official duties, no protective apparatus. That was the equation. Prince Andrew was, by all contemporary accounts, incensed. Reports from the period describe him as very upset, affronted, insulted on behalf of his daughters. Royal correspondents noted the decision would have really hurt him. An account in Woman and Home attributed the removal to intervention by his brother, then Prince of Wales, though the specific chain of authority was never officially confirmed, and the decision may equally have reflected a royal and VIP executive committee ruling, a Home Office assessment, or the straightforward application of existing criteria to two women who simply didn't qualify under the rules as written. What is confirmed is that Andrew lobbied for his daughters to be granted working royal status, which would have changed their classification and restored their protection. He lost that argument. The Express later noted that the 2011 removal set a precedent, one that would be cited years later when questions arose about Archie Sussex's security. What the palace did once, the structure allowed it to do again. Here's the specific problem with the 2011 timeline. The protection was stripped in May of that year. Andrew's public step back from royal duties came in November 2019. The complete removal of his titles didn't finish until October 2025. The daughter's institutional exposure preceded the worst of the scandal by nearly a decade. Nobody described it as abandonment in 2011. The vocabulary was fiscal prudence and modern monarchy. But the effect was that two women were told the protective structure they'd grown up inside was no longer their entitlement, years before they would need it most. That's not hindsight inventing villains. That's a timeline. There's a specific detail from this same period that tends to get buried under the larger Epstein coverage. In 2011, and again in 2012, after the palace had formally downgraded his daughter's protection status, Andrew continued sending Christmas cards to Jeffrey Epstein. Those cards included photographs of Beatrice and Eugenie. The sisters didn't write the cards. They didn't address them. In all likelihood, they had no idea where their photographs were going. But their faces, seasonal family photographs, traveled from the Duke of York's household to the home of a man who had served 13 months in a Florida jail for soliciting prostitution from a minor and who would later be federally charged with sex trafficking. Their images were deployed as social currency in a friendship they had no part in and no knowledge of. This isn't a crime, but as an illustration of what it meant to be Andrew's daughters during this period, it's exact. Their existence was material in his social world. They were part of the value he offered in relationships they had no visibility into. Long before the public consequences arrived, they were already inside the story. Epstein's calendar, documented in the book Prince Andrew, Epstein, Maxwell, and the Palace, contained an entry from April 16, 1998, a meeting with Princess Sarah Ferguson and kids. Beatrice was 9, Eugenie was 8. They were entered into Epstein's recorded contacts as appendages of their mother. The notation isn't sinister about them, it's simply a record. But that record existed. 28 years before CNN was running stories about what the arrest meant for the daughters' futures, their names were already in the file. Andrew's public unraveling began its terminal phase in the summer of 2019. Epstein was arrested in July on federal sex trafficking charges. He died in his federal cell in August, awaiting trial, under circumstances that generated their own extensive controversy. His death didn't close the story. It opened a new and more chaotic chapter of it. The women who had been strategically cautious while a powerful man was still alive began speaking more freely. The accounts were detailed, consistent, and damaging to everyone in Epstein's orbit. Andrew's name appeared in those accounts repeatedly. Photographs existed. Virginia Giuffre had given extensive testimony. The palace's position required some form of response. What they arrived at, after apparent internal debate, was a sit-down interview with Newsnight. Beatrice, clearly skeptical of this plan, showed up at the pre-interview negotiations in early November. Her arrival wasn't scheduled. She brought a notebook and asked pointed questions about the format, the framing, what protection the interview could offer versus what damage it might cause. McAlister's account, published later in Marie Claire, identified Beatrice as the key variable, the person whose buy-in made the interview possible and whose objections could have stopped it. She was apparently convinced it was the least bad option. She was wrong. The 58-minute interview broadcast November 16, 2019. Andrew told Emily Maitlis he had no recollection of meeting Giuffre, denied any sexual contact with her, and offered a series of explanations that achieved the remarkable distinction of being simultaneously implausible and undermining. He said he'd been at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter on the day Giuffre placed him at a London nightclub, a detail specific enough to invite scrutiny and not specific enough to withstand it. He explained that a photograph apparently showing him sweating in a nightclub couldn't be him because he had a condition, resulting from the Falklands War, that prevented him from sweating normally. Emily Maitlis received all of this with a stillness that was itself a kind of commentary. She later said she was quite scared in the aftermath of what the interview became. Andrew came out of the palace that day apparently satisfied. By November 20th, 4 days later, he had announced a step back from all public royal duties for the foreseeable future. The Buckingham Palace statement confirmed the suspension. USA Today called it a cancellation that might be permanent. Beatrice and Eugenie appeared publicly in the days following, attempting to continue normal life. Neither released a formal statement. There was no good statement available. Defending the interview would have required endorsing claims that were indefensible. Condemning it would have required publicly breaking with a father they clearly still loved. The only available path was forward. Keep moving. Look functional. Give the cameras nothing that becomes its own story. Beatrice was in tears, by multiple accounts, every day for weeks. The same sources that named her as the rainmaker also documented her devastation, the specific grief of someone who tried to prevent a disaster and instead helped enable it. She had sat in that room with a notebook, asking questions, trying to make this safer. Now the coverage included sentences about her role in brokering the interview, alongside sentences about the interview's catastrophic results. She didn't write her father's answers. She didn't produce the sweating explanation or the woking alibi. But she was in the room, and her name was in the copy. The 2 years following November 2019 moved through legal chambers the daughters had no access to. Andrew's legal team attempted to have Virginia Giuffre's civil sex abuse lawsuit dismissed. A judge rejected that bid on January 12, 2022. The following day, January 13th, Buckingham Palace released a statement. The language was the specific kind of precision that palace communications use when they are doing something irrevocable. With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. Andrew would no longer use the style His Royal Highness in an official capacity. Over 150 British veterans had written to the Queen calling her son an embarrassment. Alexander Wardrop, a 72-year-old veteran, was among those publicly named as a signatory. The palace had held the line as long as it could, and then moved decisively. Beatrice and Eugenie's own titles were explicitly unaffected. King Charles confirmed later that his nieces were entitled to retain their Princess of York designations as granddaughters of Queen Elizabeth II. And he was on record as being genuinely fond of both of them. Their highnesses survived everything that happened to Andrews. But here is the specific distinction that matters. A title and a reputation are different assets. They don't move together, and one can't repair the other. The January 2022 statement made the institutional status of the York name official in ways no legal title retention could fix. The man whose dukedom the sisters' titles derived from was now a man without institutional standing. Every subsequent reference to Beatrice or Eugenie as Princesses of York carried an asterisk that January 13, 2022 had written permanently into the record. Royal experts used the phrase washed up to describe the York brand. It's brutal, but it's not inaccurate. From January 2022 onward, Beatrice and Eugenie's public identities had to do significant load-bearing work to exist independently of a surname that the palace had itself just formally distanced. They held the titles, they carried the name, and the name now meant something specific and damaging in every context outside the immediate family. Crucially, they didn't disappear. After the more complete title stripping in October 2025, both sisters attended King Charles's Christmas lunch. They kept showing up at family occasions. They made themselves visible, consistently, at the precise moments when invisibility would have been easier. This persistent, unglamorous loyalty gets lost in coverage that focuses on the headline events. The choice to stay present and functional when your family name is a daily tabloid story is itself a decision, made over and over, and it deserves to be named. Andrew settled Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit in March 2022, paying a multi-million-pound figure without admitting liability. The case closed, the coverage continued. The formal dissolution of his remaining titles came in stages over the following years. October 17, 2025. Andrew agreed to surrender all remaining royal designations. October 30, 2025. Buckingham Palace published a statement on the official royal website that left no interpretive room. His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Duke of York, Earl of Inverness, Baron Killyleagh, gone. He was also evicted from Royal Lodge, his Windsor residence, ending a decades-long presence at the heart of royal geography. Within days, Beatrice and Eugenie were photographed together on a street, embracing. People magazine ran the headline, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie hug in first public appearance since Father Andrew's royal titles were stripped. Two women who had carried a particular weight for years, visible and together in the aftermath of the final institutional act. Nobody was going to arrange a press conference for them. The hug was what there was. Then, on February 19th, 2026, his 66th birthday, Andrew was arrested at his new home on the Sandringham estate. The charge was suspicion of misconduct in public office, connected to allegations of sharing confidential trade information with Jeffrey Epstein. This is legally distinct from the civil sexual misconduct allegations. Andrew was arrested for what he allegedly passed on, not for what Epstein did. In the press cycle, that distinction registered as a footnote beneath the name in the headline. CNN published the story that month. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie grapple with fallout from parents and Epstein scandal. Sources describe the sisters as trying to stay away from it to protect their own children. Neither issued a public statement about the arrest. 6 years of silence in the face of escalating crisis, and they maintained the pattern. There was still no statement available that wouldn't cost something they hadn't chosen to risk. The U.S. Department of Justice document releases, millions of pages across multiple tranches, covering Epstein's correspondence, communications, and contacts, continued surfacing material involving the York family. Andrew appeared in multiple documents. The BBC confirmed through the email releases that his contact with Epstein had lasted longer than he had previously acknowledged publicly. The BBC's headline was direct. Andrew emails show contact with Epstein lasted longer. Among the documents were communications involving Sarah Ferguson, confirmed through People magazine's reporting on the DOJ emails, with the headline, Jeffrey Epstein asked Sarah Ferguson if Beatrice or Eugenie could give a Buckingham Palace tour, new DOJ emails suggest. That's not a paraphrase or an inference. That's the reported contents of actual emails. Epstein asked Ferguson whether her daughters could be mobilized to arrange him access to Buckingham Palace. The daughters weren't asked. They didn't respond. There's no indication they knew the request was being made, but their names were in the email. Their utility, specifically their access to spaces that Epstein valued, was the subject of the conversation. 6 companies linked to Ferguson were shut down in the aftermath of the document revelations. The BBC published a piece on the key Ferguson revelations from the documents. Their assessment of the impact on the broader family was precise. For Sarah Ferguson and Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, this latest drop of Epstein emails will only add to their embarrassment. Embarrassment. Not guilt, not culpability, not complicity. Embarrassment. The specific damage of being publicly implicated in something you didn't do, by people who had authority over you, through communications that existed without your knowledge. The BBC chose that word carefully. The distinction matters. Combine the 1998 diary entry recording Princess Sarah Ferguson and Kids, the 2011 and 2012 Christmas cards featuring the daughters' photographs, and the emails using Ferguson's daughters as potential assets for a palace tour, and what you have is a documented paper trail spanning roughly 28 years in which Beatrice and Eugenie appear not as participants, not as knowing members of Epstein's network, but as instrumentalized extensions of their parents' social lives. They were in the file because their parents put them there. Through all of it, both women kept working. Eugenie's anti-slavery collective continued operating through the years of crisis. She maintained her career in the London art world. The specific detail that the daughter who co-founded an anti-trafficking charity had her name surfacing in Epstein documents is the kind of fact that sounds contrived and isn't. It's just the specific shape of her situation, that her professional purpose and her family's scandal occupy exactly the same moral territory. Beatrice's career in technology and finance continued. Andrew Lowney's observation about the sisters' strategic use of their HRH status, specifically Beatrice's work in Middle Eastern markets, suggests the title retains functional value even now, even given everything. It still opens certain doors. The cost of carrying it's that it also appears in every document release story, every arrest coverage, every annual retrospective on the worst scandals in modern royal history. Beatrice's wedding to Edoardo Mappelli-Mozzi in September 2020, a private ceremony at Windsor, went ahead in the specific atmosphere of a family 9 months past a public catastrophe. The ceremony was small. COVID provided a socially acceptable explanation for the scale. The truth of the atmosphere was slightly more complicated. The institutional exclusions were specific, not just atmospheric. Reports in 2023 and 2024 confirmed that Beatrice and Eugenie had been excluded from the Royal Ascot carriage procession, a high-visibility ceremonial role that signals inclusion in the working royal calendar. Invitations to certain palace events were reportedly withheld. The Spectator raised the question directly. What is the slimmed-down monarchy doing with Beatrice and Eugenie? Parade ran the headline, Ex-Prince Andrew's daughters banned from prominent palace event. King Charles was, by available accounts, genuinely fond of his nieces and protective of their formal standing. He confirmed their titles. He stated his affection. But being liked by your uncle the king, while being excluded from the carriage procession and watching your father get arrested on his birthday, isn't the same structural condition as being protected. Affection and institutional cover are different things, and the daughters had access to one and not the other. Royal Central's Charlie Proctor stated plainly, the king's well-intentioned vision for a slimmed-down monarchy hasn't worked. The working core had contracted faster than any structural planning anticipated, through departures, through scandal, through choices made by a generation of royals who found different paths. By 2025, there was a credible argument forming that Beatrice and Eugenie, scandal-free in their own conduct, professionally credible, consistently loyal to the institution, should be brought into formal working roles. The policy that stripped their security in 2011 might, by necessity, reverse itself. Not because the institution became more generous, but because it ran out of alternatives. The irony is significant enough to not require editorial emphasis. The children are where this story ends, and they're also where it turns. August Philip Hawk Brooksbank was born February 9, 2021. Ernest George Ronnie Brooksbank arrived May 30, 2023. Eugenie is married to Jack Brooksbank, who holds no peerage or royal title. Both boys carry the Brooksbank surname. Neither holds a British royal designation. Sienna Mappelli-Mozzi was born September 18, 2021. Beatrice is married to Edoardo Mappelli-Mozzi. Sienna carries the Mappelli-Mozzi surname. She holds no British royal title. 3 children, no British royal designations between them. The structural explanation is George V's letters patent of 1917, which restricted the HRH style and the Prince and Princess of Great Britain designations to children of the sovereign, children of sons of the sovereign, and the eldest son of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales. Beatrice and Eugenie, as daughters of a non-sovereign duke, fall outside this framework. Their children fall further outside it. No petition has been made to expand the letters patent to cover the York grandchildren. No application exists on record. The silence on that front isn't the absence of awareness. It's, in its own way, a position. What those 3 children won't have to do is significant. August Brooksbank won't receive a phone call from a PR manager asking him to issue a non-statement about the latest document release. Sienna Mappelli-Mozzi won't be named in a CNN headline asking what the arrest means for the family. Ernest Brooksbank won't have to walk out of a public building in the weeks after a palace announcement and be photographed hugging his sibling on the street while the world makes of it what it will. Their names aren't in any file. They aren't in the succession documents as titled members of the family. They aren't in Epstein's Rolodex as potential assets. They will grow up knowing their grandmother was a princess, and that their mothers hold royal titles, and that their family's name carries history. But they won't carry that history on their own names, in the specific, inescapable way that Beatrice and Eugenie have carried it their entire adult lives. This wasn't announced. There were no statements about breaking the cycle, no interviews about protecting the children from the York brand, no deliberate public architecture of separation. The structural framework of the 1917 letters patent handled the formal part, and the absence of any attempt to petition around it handled the rest. Passive, technically, but intelligible in context. Beatrice and Eugenie couldn't stop their father's choices. They couldn't control the 1917 letters patent, or the 2011 security decision, or the advice given to Andrew before November 2019, or the emails their mother received, or the documents the Department of Justice unsealed. They had been in the file since they were children, entered there by adults whose judgment they had no power to override. What they could do, and did, was make sure their children aren't. Andrew dragged his daughters into something they can't escape. The evidence for that claim is documented and specific. The 1998 diary entry that put them in Epstein's records before either was a teenager. The £500,000 security apparatus stripped in 2011 on the grounds that they hadn't earned working royal status, leaving them institutionally exposed 8 years before the scandal peaked. The Christmas cards in 2011 and 2012 bearing their photographs, sent from their father's household to a convicted sex offender. The pre-interview negotiations where Beatrice tried and failed to stop a catastrophe. The January 2022 Palace statement that made the York brand's toxicity official. The Epstein emails, asking their mother whether they could be used to arrange a palace tour. The February 2026 arrest that sent the press spinning again with the same surnames it always returns to. Through all of it, they went to the Christmas lunches. They showed up. They kept working. They said nothing into a microphone because nothing useful was available to say. They married people with different surnames. They had children who carry those surnames. They co-founded anti-trafficking charities and built finance careers, and attended garden parties, and emerged from each new wave of coverage, still standing, still visible, still functioning. What they built, the careers, the families, the professional reputations that exist entirely independently of anything their father did or didn't do, represents something that doesn't have a clean single word for it. It's not heroism. It's closer to the daily, undramatic, completely unglamorous refusal to be defined by the worst thing someone else did in your name. And then choosing, without a press release, to make sure the next generation doesn't have to practice it. That's Beatrice. That's Eugenie. That's the actual story, which is messier and more human than the headline version, and worth knowing. If you want more stories like this one, the people behind the scandal, the ones paying costs they didn't accrue, subscribe.